If I close my eyes, I can still hear the sound that changed my life. The rain hammered against my bedroom window that October night in 1987. Each drop like a tiny fist, demanding to be let in. I was supposed to be asleep, had been for hours, according to my parents, but the storm kept pulling me from restless dreams. The smell of wet asphalt drifted through the crack in my window, mixed with something else I couldn't quite place. Something metallic. Something wrong. I pressed my face against the cold glass, watching the streetlight flicker like a dying candle 3 houses down. That's when I saw the headlights cutting through the darkness, moving slower than they should have been. Too slow, too deliberate. The Cadillac sedan I didn't recognize crept past the Henderson's place, past the old Miller property, and disappeared into the tree line where Oakwood Avenue dead-ended into the state forest. My heart started beating faster, though I couldn't have told you why. The sirens came later. Distant at first, like the wail of some wounded animal, then closer, splitting the night air with their urgency. Red and blue lights painted my ceiling in frantic patterns as they raced past our house, heading toward the interstate. But that car, that slow, predatory car, had gone the other direction entirely. I should have gone back to bed. Should have pulled the covers over my head and let sleep take me. Instead, I grabbed my jacket and slipped out through the back door. The way I'd done 100 times before when adventure called and parents slept soundly. The rain soaked through my sneakers within seconds. Each step squelched against the muddy ground as I made my way toward the forest, drawn by something I couldn't name. The metallic smell grew stronger with each breath, coating the back of my throat like copper pennies. My hands shook from cold, I told myself, though October in Pennsylvania wasn't that cold yet. I was 14 years old, invincible in the way only teenagers can be. Convinced that monsters lived only in movies, and bad things happened only to other people, other families, other towns. I was wrong about all of it. For 33 years, I carried the truth of that night alone. Buried so deep, I sometimes wondered if I'd dreamed it all. My family stopped believing me after the first week. The police stopped returning my calls after the first month. Friends stopped inviting me places after the whispers started whispers about the Anderson kid who made up stories, who saw things that weren't there, who couldn't tell the difference between reality and imagination. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. And I knew that somewhere in the darkness beyond those trees, something terrible had happened while decent people slept safe in their beds. Until last summer, when the construction crew broke ground behind the old Walmart, I thought I'd take that truth to my grave. Millfield, Pennsylvania wasn't the kind of place you'd find on a postcard, but it was home to 3,847 people who mostly liked it that way. Nestled between rolling hills dotted with dairy farms and the sprawling state forest that seemed to swallow half the county, our town existed in that sweet spot where everybody knew everybody, but people still minded their own business most of the time. In 1987, gas cost 93 cents a gallon at Murphy's station. And old Pete Murphy still came out to pump it for you if you looked like you needed help. The radio crackled with Bon Jovi and Madonna, while teenagers in acid-washed jeans congregated outside Rosie's Diner, sharing cigarettes and gossip in equal measure. Friday nights meant high school football at Thompson Field, where the bleachers groaned under the weight of the entire town, turning out to cheer on the Millfield Eagles. It was the kind of place where doors stayed unlocked, where kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on, where the biggest scandal in recent memory involved the Methodist minister's wife running off with a traveling salesman 3 summers back. People moved here to escape the problems of bigger cities, to raise families in a place where the worst thing that might happen was Mrs. Kowalski's cat getting stuck in the Henderson's oak tree again. I was born and raised on Oakwood Avenue, in a white 2-story colonial that my dad bought fresh out of college when he landed his job at the paper mill. My bedroom window faced the forest, and I'd spent countless nights falling asleep to the sound of wind through the pine trees. My best friend Tommy Bradshaw lived 2 streets over, and together we'd explored every creek, every abandoned barn, every forgotten trail within a 5-mile radius. We were typical small-town kids in 1987, members of the last generation to grow up without the internet, without cell phones, without the constant buzz of digital connection that would come to define childhood in later decades. Our entertainment was simpler. Pick-up basketball games in driveways, marathon sessions of Super Mario Bros. On Tommy's Nintendo, and elaborate games of hide-and-seek that could span entire neighborhoods. The adults in our lives seemed impossibly wise and unshakably secure. Police Chief Raymond Burke had been keeping the peace for 15 years without ever drawing his weapon. My 8th grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, liked to brag that in 30 years of teaching, she'd never had to deal with anything worse than a few playground scuffles and the occasional case of chewing gum in hair. Nothing bad ever happens in Millfield, she'd say, with the confidence of someone who'd never encountered evidence to the contrary. We take care of our own here. It was a beautiful lie, wrapped in the warm comfort of small-town mythology. And, like most beautiful lies, it worked perfectly until the moment it didn't. October 23, 1987. A Friday night that started like any other and ended with my childhood buried 6 feet deep in Pennsylvania soil. Tommy and I had spent the evening at the high school football game, watching the Eagles get demolished by the Clearfield Bisons, in a game that wasn't as close as the 28-14 final score suggested. The autumn air carried the smell of burning leaves and concession stand hot dogs, and the bleachers buzzed with the comfortable rhythms of small-town Friday night football. I can still remember the way the field lights cut through the darkness, creating a perfect green rectangle of normalcy in a world that was about to tilt sideways. We walked home together after the game, our breath visible in little puffs as the temperature dropped. Tommy peeled off at Elm Street with a casual "see you tomorrow," and I continued alone toward Oakwood Avenue, my sneakers crunching through the carpet of fallen leaves that lined the sidewalk. The storm hit around midnight. I was in that drowsy space between wake and sleep when the first rumble of thunder rolled across the valley. Within minutes, the sky opened up like someone had torn a hole in heaven itself. Rain lashed against my window with a fury that seemed personal, and the wind howled through the trees with a voice I'd never heard before. That's when I saw the car. At first, it was just headlights moving too slowly down Oakwood Avenue, cutting through the rain like twin spotlights. But something about the deliberate pace made my skin crawl. This wasn't someone driving carefully in bad weather, this was someone who didn't want to be noticed. The dark sedan crept past the Henderson place, where Mr. Henderson's porch light flickered in the wind, past the old Miller property with its sagging fence and overgrown yard, and then it disappeared into the tree line where the street ended and the forest began. I should have rolled over and gone back to sleep. Instead, I found myself pulling on jeans and a jacket, driven by something I couldn't name. Curiosity, maybe. Or that peculiar brand of teenage invincibility that makes 14-year-olds think they can walk through fire without getting burned. The back door squeaked as I slipped outside, but the storm swallowed the sound. Rain soaked through my jacket within seconds, and my sneakers squelched against the muddy ground as I made my way toward the forest. Each step felt like crossing a threshold I couldn't uncross. The smell hit me first, that metallic odor I'd noticed earlier. Stronger now, mixing with the earthy scent of wet leaves and rotting logs. It tasted like pennies on my tongue, and something deep in my gut told me to turn around, go home, forget whatever was drawing me deeper into the darkness. I kept walking anyway. The tree line swallowed me whole. Branches scraped against my jacket, and roots caught at my feet as I stumbled through the undergrowth, guided only by the occasional flash of lightning that turned the forest into a monochrome photograph. My heart hammered so hard, I was sure it would give me away to whatever was out there in the dark. That's when I heard voices. Low, urgent whispers cutting through the sound of rain on leaves. 2 men, maybe 3. Somewhere ahead of me in a small clearing I remembered from childhood adventures with Tommy. I crept closer, using the storm as cover, until I could see them through the tangle of pine branches. 3 figures huddled around something large and dark on the ground. In the sporadic lightning flashes, I caught glimpses of what they were doing, dragging, lifting, struggling with something wrapped in what looked like a heavy tarp or sleeping bag. Something that was the wrong size and shape to be anything but a body. The metallic smell was stronger here, mixing with something else that made my stomach lurch. Fear locked my muscles in place as I watched them carry their burden toward an old hunting shed that had been abandoned for years. half hidden by overgrown brambles and fallen logs. Lightning split the sky, and for one horrible second, I saw everything with perfect clarity. 3 men in dark clothing, their faces hidden by baseball caps and upturned collars. The bundle they carried between them, heavy and awkward, and unmistakably human in its proportions. And worst of all, one corner of the wrapping had come loose, revealing what looked like a pale hand trailing in the mud. The thunder that followed seemed to crack the world in half. That's when one of them looked up. Looked right at me. I ran, crashed through the underbrush like a spooked deer, branches tearing at my clothes and face, my lungs burning as I gasped the rain-soaked air. Behind me, I heard shouts, the sound of pursuit, but terror gave me wings. I burst out of the tree line and sprinted across backyards, leaping fences and dodging garbage cans until I reached our back door. Inside, I stood dripping in our kitchen, my whole body shaking with more than just cold. The normal sounds of our house, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock, my father's snores from upstairs seemed to come from another world entirely. I had witnessed something that wasn't supposed to happen in places like Millfield, something that shattered the comfortable lie we all lived by. And I was just stupid enough to think someone would believe me. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale hand trailing in the mud, heard those urgent whispers cutting through the rain. By dawn, I'd convinced myself I had to tell someone that keeping this secret would be worse than whatever consequences might come from speaking up. My parents were drinking coffee in the kitchen when I stumbled downstairs, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Mum took one look at me and immediately went into mother mode, pressing the back of her hand to my forehead and asking if I was coming down with something. "I need to tell you something," I said, my voice cracking like I was going through puberty all over again. "Last night, I saw you look terrible." "Honey," Mum interrupted, already reaching for the medicine cabinet. "Why don't you go back to bed? You can tell us about your nightmare later." It wasn't a nightmare. The words tumbled out in a rush: the car, the forest, the 3 men, the body. I told them everything, watching their expressions shift from concern to confusion to the kind of patient skepticism adults reserve for children who claim to have seen monsters in their closets. Dad set down his coffee cup with the careful precision of someone choosing his words. "Son, you were out in that storm last night, after we told you to stay in bed." That's when I realized I'd made my first mistake. In my desperation to tell the truth about what I'd seen, I'd confessed to sneaking out, which, in my parents' hierarchy of concerns, was apparently more important than potential murder. "We'll discuss the sneaking out later," Mum said, her teacher voice taking over. "But Michael, honey, what you're describing, it sounds like you had a very vivid dream. Maybe you got up to use the bathroom and thought you saw something outside, but I know what I saw." The words came out sharper than I intended, and I saw my parents exchange that look, the one that said they were dealing with a difficult teenager having a meltdown. Dad leaned forward, his voice taking on the reasonable tone he used when explaining why I couldn't have a motorcycle or stay out past curfew. "Mike, think about this logically. Why would someone dump a body practically in our backyard? And even if they did, why would they do it during the worst storm we've had all year, when they could barely see 10 feet in front of them?" Because that's exactly when they thought no one would be watching, I wanted to say. But the rational part of my brain, the part that had been raised in Millfield, where nothing bad ever happened, was already starting to whisper doubts. Had the lightning really shown me what I thought I'd seen? Had fear and imagination transformed something innocent into something sinister? By the time Chief Burke arrived that afternoon, I was already losing the battle against my own certainty. Burke was a good man, the kind of small-town police chief who knew everyone's name and still believed his job was to serve and protect rather than surveil and intimidate. He sat at our kitchen table with his hat in his lap, listening patiently as I told my story for the 3rd time that day. "Well, son," he said when I finished, "that's quite a tale. Tell me, did you get a good look at these men? Could you identify them if you saw them again?" I had to admit I couldn't. The storm, the darkness, the baseball caps pooled, I'd barely seen their faces at all. "And this shed you mentioned, the old hunting cabin, you know that's been abandoned for years, right?" Kids have been telling ghost stories about that place since I was your age." The doubt in his voice was gentle but unmistakable. When he stood to leave, he put a hand on my shoulder with the kind of paternal kindness that somehow made everything worse. "I'll tell you what, Michael. I'll have one of my deputies take a drive out there tomorrow, just to put your mind at ease. But between you and me, I think maybe the storm and the darkness played tricks on you. Happens to the best of us." The next morning at school, word had already gotten around. Small towns are like that. Information travels faster than physics should allow, picking up embellishments and distortions along the way. By first period, the story had morphed into me claiming to have seen aliens. By lunch, I was apparently talking to ghosts in the forest. Anderson's finally lost it. I heard Jenny Morrison whisper to her friends as I passed their table in the cafeteria. Tommy tried to stick up for me, bless him, but even he couldn't quite hide the doubt in his eyes when he asked, "You really saw all that stuff, Mike, really?" Deputy Collins found nothing at the shed. No disturbed ground, no signs of recent activity. Nothing but decades of accumulated leaves and the usual debris that collects in abandoned places. The rain had washed away any footprints, any trace that anyone had been there at all. Sometimes our minds can make us see things that aren't really there. The school counselor told me during what was supposed to be a voluntary meeting but felt more like an intervention, especially when we're stressed or scared. Within 2 weeks, the whispers had crystallized into a reputation that would follow me through the rest of high school and beyond. Michael Anderson, the kid who made up stories. The boy who couldn't tell fantasy from reality. The one you couldn't quite trust to separate truth from imagination. And slowly, insidiously, I began to wonder if they were right. High school became a careful dance of pretending that October night had never happened. I learned to laugh along when classmates brought up Anderson's ghost story, to shrug and roll my eyes as if I couldn't believe how ridiculous I'd been as a naive. The performance became so convincing that sometimes I almost believed it myself. Almost. But the forest doesn't forget. Even when you desperately wanted to. Every time I walked past the tree line on Oakwood Avenue, my skin would crawl with the memory of that metallic smell. Every thunderstorm brought back the sound of those urgent whispers cutting through the rain. And sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet, I'd find myself standing at my bedroom window, staring into the darkness beyond the trees, waiting for headlights that moved too slowly. I threw myself into being normal aggressively, deliberately normal. I played JV basketball, joined the yearbook committee, dated Sarah Mitchell for 3 months junior year. I became the kind of unremarkable teenage boy that small towns specialize in producing good enough grades to avoid parental lectures. Just popular enough to avoid complete social exile, forgettable enough that people stopped associating my name with that strange story from sophomore year. Tommy remained my closest friend, though something had shifted between us after that night. He never said he didn't believe me, but he never said he did, either. We just learned to navigate around the subject. The way you learn to walk carefully around a sinkhole that might give way if you put your full weight on it. College couldn't come fast enough. Penn State felt like escaping to another planet, a place where nobody knew about the Anderson kid who talked to ghosts. Where I could rebuild myself from scratch. I studied journalism, drawn perhaps by some subconscious need to understand how truth gets buried, how stories get dismissed, how inconvenient realities disappear beneath layers of reasonable doubt. I rarely came home during those years. Christmas, maybe Easter, if Mum guilt-tripped me enough. Each visit felt like stepping back in time, like the town existed in some amber-preserved version of 1987. The same faces, the same conversations. The same comfortable certainties about what kind of place Millfield was, and what kind of things did or didn't happen there. After graduation, I found work at a newspaper in Pittsburgh, covering city council meetings and school board elections. The kind of mundane local reporting that forms the backbone of small-town democracy. I was good at it, maybe because I understood how communities work, how they protect their self-image, how they collectively decide what stories are worth telling, and which ones are better left alone. One married Linda in 1995, a fellow reporter with quick wit and patient eyes who never pressed me about why. I sometimes woke up in the middle of the night with the smell of wet leaves in my nostrils. We moved to a suburb where the streets had names like Meadowbrook Lane and Sunset Drive, where the biggest controversy was whether the homeowners association should allow decorative lawn flamingos. But you can't outrun memory, no matter how many miles you put between yourself and the place where it was born. The nightmares came in waves. Sometimes months would pass without incident, and I'd convince myself I'd finally moved past it all. Then something would trigger the memories: a news report about missing persons, the sound of rain against the window, the particular quality of light during an October thunderstorm, and I'd be 14 years old again, crashing through the underbrush with my heart hammering against my ribs. Linda learned to recognize the signs. She'd find me in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, nursing a cup of coffee I didn't remember making, staring at nothing. "Pennsylvania, again?" she'd ask, and I'd nod, and she'd sit with me until the ghosts retreated to whatever corner of my mind they called home. I kept track of Millfield through the internet, the way you might monitor a scar to make sure it wasn't getting infected. The town's website proudly proclaimed its status as one of Pennsylvania's safest communities, a place where families could raise children without worry. Chief Burke retired in 1998, replaced by his deputy, who was replaced by someone from outside the county who lasted 2 years before moving on to a bigger department in Altoona. Sometimes I'd see mentions of missing person cases in the surrounding counties, names that meant nothing to me but sparked that familiar knot of dread in my stomach. A teenager who vanished after a party in 1989. A traveling salesman who disappeared somewhere between Millfield and Clearfield in 1993. A young woman whose car was found abandoned on a back road in 1996. Keys still in the ignition, purse untouched on the passenger seat. Probably just coincidences. Probably unrelated. Probably the kind of random tragedies that happen everywhere. Even in places where nothing bad is supposed to occur, probably. But late at night, when the world was quiet and my defenses were down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the only person who knew these weren't isolated incidents. That somewhere in the darkness beyond those pine trees, secrets were buried deeper than anyone wanted to dig. July 15, 2020. A Wednesday that started with my usual morning coffee and ended with 33 years of doubt crashing down around me like a house of cards. I was working from home. One of the few silver linings of the pandemic was that newspaper editors had finally accepted that reporters could file stories from anywhere with an internet connection. Linda was in the garden, fighting her eternal war against aphids, when my phone buzzed with a news alert from the Millfield Gazette, a weekly paper I'd subscribed 2 years ago in a moment of nostalgic weakness. Construction crew uncovers mysterious container behind former Walmart site. My hands were shaking before I finished reading the headline. The new shopping complex had been in development for months, part of Millfield's modest attempt to modernize itself for the 21st century. The old Walmart had closed in 2018, leaving behind a massive empty building and a parking lot that had become an unofficial drag strip for bored teenagers. When the developers finally broke ground behind the old store, they were expecting nothing more complicated than utility lines and maybe some construction debris from the original build. They weren't expecting to find a rusted metal container buried 8 feet down in what used to be state forest land. I clicked through to the full article with the desperate urgency of someone checking lottery numbers. The reporter, kid named Jessica Walsh, who couldn't have been more than 25, had done her homework. The container was approximately 3 feet by 2 feet, sealed with what appeared to be heavy tape that had partially deteriorated over the decades. Initial X-rays suggested it contained clothing, personal effects, and what might be photographic materials. The Pennsylvania State Police had taken over the investigation. Detective Sarah Chen, the lead investigator, was quoted as saying they were treating it as a potential cold case, though she declined to speculate about the contents until the container could be properly processed. My laptop screen blurred as memories I'd spent decades suppressing came flooding back. The metallic smell, the urgent whispers, 3 figures struggling with something heavy and human-shaped in the darkness. The container had been found less than 50 yards from the old hunting shed. I called Linda inside and showed her the article, my voice barely steady enough to get the words out. She read in silence, her expression growing more concerned with each paragraph. "Michael," she said finally, "this could be completely unrelated to what you saw." But even as she said it, I could see the doubt in her eyes. 33 years of marriage teaches you to read between the lines. And Linda was thinking the same thing I was. What were the odds? The follow-up article came 2 days later, and this one nearly stopped my heart entirely. Detective Chen had held a brief press conference to announce that the container held clothing items consistent with someone who had disappeared in the late 1980s, along with several personal effects and a single Polaroid photograph. While they couldn't release details about the investigation, they were asking anyone with information about unusual activity in the area during that time period to contact the state police. It was the photograph that broke me. The image was grainy, clearly a screenshot from a television broadcast, but I recognized it instantly. Not the face of the victim that had been carefully obscured, but the location. The background showed the distinctive moss-covered logs and particular arrangement of pine trees that surrounded the old hunting shed. But more than that, visible in the corner of the frame, was something that made my blood turn to ice water. A dark green garbage bag, partially visible beneath fallen leaves. The same type of heavy-duty bag I'd seen 3 men struggling with on that rain-soaked October night 33 years ago. The photograph had been taken at the scene. Someone had documented what they'd done. I sat in my home office for the rest of that day, staring at the screen, feeling the careful architecture of my adult life crumbling around me. Every rationalization I'd built, every doubt I'd cultivated, every moment of wondering if I'd imagined it, all gone. Erased by a single photograph that proved what I'd known all along. Linda found me there at dinner time, still staring at the laptop screen. She didn't ask questions, just put her arms around my shoulders and held me while I finally let myself cry for that 14-year-old boy who'd witnessed something horrible and spent the next 3 decades being told it hadn't happened. "You have to call them," she said quietly. "You have to tell them what you saw." I nodded, though the thought terrified me more than anything had in years. After all this time, after all the doubt and dismissal, and carefully constructed denial, I was going to have to return to that October night and tell the truth again. Only this time, someone might actually believe me. The next morning, I dialed the number for Detective Chun's office with hands that shook like autumn leaves. When she answered, I took a deep breath that seemed to reach all the way back to 1987. "Detective Chen. My name is Michael Anderson, and I have information about your cold case. 33 years ago, I saw 3 men burying something near that shed." The silence that followed felt like a lifetime. "Mr. Anderson," Detective Chen said finally, her voice carefully neutral in the way police officers learn to modulate when they're not sure if they're talking to a witness or a crank caller. "Can you tell me when exactly you believe you witnessed this activity?" October 23, 1987. It was a Friday night, during a thunderstorm. The date came out without hesitation, burned into my memory like a brand. I was 14 years old. Another pause. I could hear her typing in the background, probably pulling up whatever records existed from that time period. "And you're certain about the date?" "I went to the football game that night, Millfield versus Clearfield. We lost 28-14. The details spilled out with startling clarity, as if saying them out loud had unlocked some vault in my mind. I reported it to the police the next morning. Chief Burke came to our house. The typing stopped. "Mr. Anderson, I'm going to need you to come in and give a formal statement. How soon can you get here?" 4 hours later, I was sitting in an interview room at the Pennsylvania State Police Barracks, feeling like that scared 14-year-old all over again. But Detective Chen was nothing like Chief Burke had been, where Burke had offered paternal skepticism wrapped in small-town kindness. Chen approached my story with the methodical precision of someone who'd built her career on the principle that old cases don't solve themselves. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes and the kind of focused attention that made me feel like she was cataloging every word, every pause, every flicker of expression that crossed my face. "Tell me everything," she said, and for the first time in 33 years, I did. I told her about sneaking out during the storm, about following the slow-moving car into the forest. I described the metallic smell, the urgent whispers, the three figures struggling with their heavy burden. I told her about the moment one of them looked up and saw me. About running home through the rain with my heart hammering against my ribs. Chen took notes without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification about distances or timing or physical descriptions. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. Mr. Anderson, I've been working cold cases for 8 years. Most of the time, when someone comes forward after decades with a story like yours, there are inconsistencies, details that don't quite match up, memories that have been altered by time or wishful thinking. She paused, consulting her notes. But everything you've told me aligns perfectly with what we've found. The location, the timeline, even some details about the scene that we haven't released to the public. The validation hit me like a physical force. After 33 years of doubt, of being told I'd imagined it all, hearing a professional investigator confirm that my memories were accurate felt like being granted absolution. There's something else, Chen continued, reaching for a manila folder. We've identified the victim. Rebecca Martinez, age 19, disappeared from a bus station in Clearfield on October 22, 1987. She was traveling from Philadelphia to visit her sister in Pittsburgh. Never made it. She slid a photograph across the table. A young woman with dark hair and kind eyes, wearing the kind of bright smile that suggested she believed the world was fundamentally good. Looking at her face, I felt the weight of 33 years settle on my shoulders like a stone. Her family never stopped looking for her, Chen said quietly. Her sister Maria still lives in Pittsburgh. She's been calling our office every year on the anniversary of Rebecca's disappearance, asking if we found anything new. The thought of that sister woman I'd never met, but whose grief I'd unknowingly carried for 3 decades, broke something loose in my chest. All those years of wondering if I should have done more, said more, pushed harder for someone to believe me. All those nights of waking up with the taste of metal in my mouth and the sound of whispers in my ears. We're going to need you to work with a forensic artist, Chen said, pulling out another folder. I know it's been a long time, but anything you can remember about those men, height, build, clothing might help us identify them. As I walked out of the state police barracks that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced since I was 14 years old. The certainty that truth, no matter how long buried, has a way of clawing its way back to the surface. Rebecca Martinez finally had a voice. And after 33 years of silence, so did I. The forensic artist was a patient woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, who specialized in extracting decades-old memories from reluctant witnesses. Over 3 sessions, she helped me reconstruct fragments I didn't even know I'd retained, the way one of the men favored his left leg, suggesting an old injury or chronic condition, the distinctive slouch of another's shoulders, the third man's nervous habit of constantly adjusting his baseball cap. It wasn't much, but, combined with the physical evidence and Detective Chen's methodical investigation, it was enough. Harold Buddy Kremlin was arrested on September 3, 2020. At his home on Pine Street, less than a mile from where I grew up. He was 71 years old, a retired maintenance worker who'd lived in Millfield his entire life. The kind of man who still waved to neighbors from his front porch, who helped elderly women carry groceries to their cars, who'd served on the volunteer fire department for 30 years. The kind of man everyone described as harmless. Detective Chen called me the day of the arrest. We found them, Mr. Anderson. The other 2 died years ago, one in a car accident in '94, the other from cancer in 2008. But Kremlin's still here, and he's talking. The confession came in pieces over several weeks. Kremlin painted a picture of 3 young men who'd thought they were smarter than they were, who'd let a night of drinking and bad decisions spiral into something unforgivable. Rebecca Martinez had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, accepting a ride from strangers when her bus was delayed. What started as harassment turned violent when she tried to get away. He says they panicked, Chen told me during one of our regular check-ins. Claims it was an accident, that they never meant for it to go as far as it did. The other 2 wanted to call police, but Kremlin convinced them they'd all go to prison. So they decided to hide the evidence. The photograph found in the container had been Kremlin's insurance policy, proof that the others were equally culpable. a guarantee of their silence. He'd kept it all these years, too paranoid to destroy it, too guilty to look at it. Millfield reacted to the news the way small towns always do when their comfortable certainties are shattered. Some people expressed shock and disbelief. How could Buddy Kremlin, who'd fixed their furnaces and coached Little League Baseball, have done something so horrible? Others claimed they'd always suspected something was off about him, rewriting history to accommodate this new reality. The local paper ran a front-page story about the arrest, and buried in the 6th paragraph was a single sentence that made me cry. Police credit a tip from a local resident who witnessed suspicious activity in 1987, but was not believed at the time. Not believed at the time. 5 words that summarized 33 years of doubt and dismissal. Tommy called me after the story broke. We hadn't spoken in years, but his voice was exactly the same as I remembered from high school, warm and slightly raspy from too many cigarettes. "Jesus, Mike," he said without preamble. "All this time, you were right. All this time, we should have believed you." I told him it was okay, that I understood why no one had listened to a 14-year-old with an impossible story. But the truth was, his words meant more to me than I'd expected. After decades of carrying this burden alone, having someone acknowledge that I'd been wronged felt like a gift I hadn't known I needed. Kremlin pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 15 to 30 years in prison. At 71, it was likely a life sentence. During the proceedings, I sat in the back of the courtroom and watched this ordinary-looking old man shuffle to the defendant's table in shackles, and I tried to reconcile him with the shadowy figure I'd glimpsed through the rain all those years ago. Rebecca Martinez's sister Maria spoke at the sentencing hearing. She thanked the court, thanked Detective Chen, and then, unexpectedly, she turned toward the gallery and thanked me. "For 33 years, my family lived with questions," she said, her voice strong despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "We never knew what happened to Rebecca, never knew if she was still out there somewhere, still alive but unable to come home. This man," she gestured toward me, "gave my sister her voice back. He gave our family the truth we needed to finally say goodbye." Walking out of that courthouse, I felt something I'd forgotten was possible. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from forgetting, but the deeper satisfaction of knowing that truth, no matter how long buried, has a way of surfacing when the time is right. The nightmares stopped. The metallic taste that had haunted my dreams for over 3 decades finally faded. And for the first time since I was 14 years old, I could drive past Millfield's town limits without feeling like I was carrying a secret too heavy for one person to bear. The truth doesn't fade with time, it waits for the day someone is willing to see it. Sometimes that day takes 33 years to arrive, but it comes eventually, bringing justice in its wake like dawn after the longest night.